Okay, we're live? Okay, it looks like we are. So I'm going to start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to MAPS Canada's live webinar survey of the current state of psychedelic research in Canada, exploring psychedelic research. I'm Ismael Santos Bro. I'm the board chair of MAPS Canada, and I'm going to keep my intro very short because I'd simply like to introduce our new executive director, Scott Bernstein, who will be saying some more about his background. And we're really excited to have Scott on board as our ED. As you may know, we've been going through a bit of a period. Sorry, my son is in the background. Without an ED, and we're a very lean organization, and we're amazed and excited and thrilled to have a person like Scott with his caliber and his experience joining the organization, and we're excited to see how things go. We've got a lot of exciting work ahead of us, and it's amazing to have a solid team and experience that Scott brings. So over to you, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ismael. And welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you here. I'm honored and really excited to be the executive director of this great organization. And I'm coming to you from Vancouver, which are the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I just give a bit of my background. I've been working in the drug policy field for about 14 years now. I actually started working on the legal case as a law student, the legal case for the Insight supervised consumption site that was challenged by the federal government, and ended up working as a drug policy lawyer for a number of years, and worked doing strategic litigation on behalf of people who use drugs. And I moved from there on to a bit more of global drug policy work, working with the Open Society Foundations based in New York City, where I worked with organizations from around the world, particularly in Latin America and Africa, and helped to coordinate efforts around advocacy at the UN General Assembly special session on drugs that happened at the UN in New York in 2016. When I came back to Canada, I worked for an organization called the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, and was working and doing policy work, advocating for decriminalization of drugs, of all drugs, and harm reduction and expansion, and ultimately legal regulation of all substances. So I have a long grounding in the bigger aspects of drug policy, but ultimately my passion and personal passion has been around psychedelics since the age of 18. Psychedelics have been instrumental in changing my life and in creating deeper relationships with people. And I really appreciate the potential for healing and growth of humans who choose to use psychedelic substances. And so I was really honored and excited when this position came up to take it on and really work with such a great organization that's been in Canada for a number of years to really move the field of psychedelics forward in a meaningful and values and evidence-based place in Canada. So I think folks are familiar with MAPS, but we're actually celebrating a 10-year anniversary this year. We were founded in 2011, and it was a vehicle to help facilitate the MDMA clinical trials in Canada. And so we helped to raise money. Phase 2, we were actively involved, and you'll hear more about that, about how we were involved in helping establish sites and people. And so that was something we're quite proud of. And over time, we evolved to really pick up pieces around advocacy for access to psychedelics, education of people about what psychedelic research is about, what kinds of things are important to know in psychedelics. And so those are things we're going to be continuing to do into the future as well. So as Ismael mentioned, the past year has been one of transition for the organization. The founding executive director stepped down, and a woman, Vivian Smith, served as an interim executive director for several months until I was brought on and started in September. And so we've been spending the last few months really thinking about the organization and really building and creating steps to being a sustainable organization for the next 10 years and beyond. And so our vision for MAPS Canada moving into the future, where we now in Canada have a very active and engaged and becoming more crowded field of psychedelics. It's important for us to be true to our roots, which is being a research and field leader in Canada, and also advocating for the values and evidence-based psychedelic regulations and policies, but also appreciating our position in the wider field of drug policy reform. And so we need to be advocating for changes around policies that affect people who use all kinds of drugs, including psychedelics, and working to really educate and share knowledge about the research in psychedelics and supporting multidisciplinary research on psychedelics in Canada. So that's a bit of in a very short and brief nutshell of where where we're heading in the next few years, is really working to help create create an understanding and a momentum around research in psychedelics that's based on values and evidence, and really supports the growth of this field as it's been doing. So this webinar, really thank you for coming. This webinar is a kickoff, doing a bit of a survey of the psychedelic research in Canada, and we're really honored to have some wonderful panelists on. And the first part of this webinar is going to be Sabrina Ramkellawan, who she's been volunteering as a lead for our research committee and has been doing a wonderful job. We're very grateful for that. And Sabrina is going to be presenting a bit of an overview of psychedelic research in Canada. So let me jump in and give a bit of a bio about Sabrina. So Sabrina started her career as a registered nurse with a critical care specialty. She has experience in mental health, critical care settings, and community nursing. She's been working in clinical research for more than 15 years, conducting phase 1 to 4 clinical trials to bring new drugs, treatments, and devices to market. She's conducted clinical trials in therapeutic areas, including PTSD, neurological pain, traumatic brain injury, and in the area of addiction. And she's the president of the Clinical Research Association of Canada, which is a nonprofit that provides a forum for clinical research education specific to Canadian researchers. She's the COO and co-founder of Node Group, which is a female-led contract research organization and consultancy that supports psychedelic and cannabinoid clinical trials globally. And as I mentioned, she serves as our research committee lead for MAPS Canada. And so in addition to conducting clinical trials, Sabrina teaches and has built postgraduate healthcare and clinical research programs for Seneca College and Michener Institute of Education at UHN. And she currently teaches courses on topics such as ethics, diversity, and regulations in clinical research. So really want to, again, thanks to Sabrina for sharing her knowledge and information here, and I'll hand it off to her.
Okay, my mic's on? I think so. Thank you so much for the introduction. It seems so long, I should have cut it down a little shorter. I'm just gonna have some slides prepared just to kind of give you a bit of an overview of kind of the landscape of what clinical trials are happening in Canada. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what it takes to get clinical trials through to market. And I'm going to ask for some assistance to get my slides up.
Just give me 1 second. I want to pull that up for you. Sorry about that.
The slides don't seem to want to work with me, so getting some help.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Sorry, 1 second.
Okay. While that's going up, I just wanted to say that I've always had an interest, even as a nurse, in the area of mental health and addiction, and not just from a professional interest, but it was also a personal interest. I grew up with a family member that had depression and mental health issues, as well as addiction. And this was during the days where, mental health wasn't a focus, and there was that stigma related to it. And so I've always been interested in this area because I think, I've had that personal impact of having a family member go through this and realizing that, the mental health care out there at the time and treatment with respect to addiction didn't work for her. So for me, it's exciting to kind of look at a potential new therapy that we're looking at now that has impact to help with mental health and addiction as well. So really exciting to be part of this. And that was one of the reasons that I joined MAPS Canada, is to see, what I can do to help with this area of research in terms of psychedelics. Can you go to the first slide? So just going to talk about exploring psychedelic research in Canada. Next slide. I was excited that I found the picture of the bike with the psychedelic colors. So we're definitely going through a psychedelic renaissance. I want to talk a little bit about kind of where we are in terms of how people are feeling about psychedelics and research. Psychiatric medicine has really had no real advancement since kind of the 80s and 90s with SSRIs and antidepressants. And there's been very little pharma investment in the last 20 to 30 years with respect to bringing new novel drugs to market in the area of mental health. And so I think that there's a huge need for something. When we look at mental health issues and addiction, it's only gone worse, than it was pre-COVID. And so there's a huge need. And I think that, when I talk to a lot of the people in the kind of the medical community, they're really open for something new because we're in desperate need of new alternatives for psychiatric medicine. So, there's definitely that open arms to this type of therapy and looking at it and having research in this area. Want to touch on MAPS US in terms of they're really, really leading the way in terms of MDMA clinical trials now in phase 3. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it takes to get to phase 3 clinical trials, just to kind of show the magnitude of how difficult it is and how significant it is as well. And I talked about little pharma investment. I think it's really, really amazing to think that a nonprofit organization has been able to take MDMA clinical trials all the way through to phase 3. That's really not heard of in medicine. Usually clinical trials and new drugs and new devices and things come forward because of pharmaceutical companies and their investment. And so it really is really, truly amazing that people have donated money in the millions and millions to be able to bring this drug all the way through to phase 3. So it's really, really interesting to me that, individuals have really brought these drugs forward. And I think that's something to really think about. MAPS Canada, Scott kind of touched on this. MAPS Canada was created in 2011. And that was really to lead kind of MDMA research efforts here in Canada and being part of that research and bringing and moving psychedelics forward. So I think it's an exciting time to be in Canada and being part of this. We're also seeing a ton of psychedelic companies here in Canada. And although I'm going to talk a bit about the clinical trials that are happening now in Canada, I think that, in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months down the line, we're going to see a lot more research. And I think it's really, really exciting. We're almost kind of at the beginning of this in terms of this area of research and drug development that's going to happen in this area. Next slide. So just a little bit of an overview. Right now, and this is publicly available information. Now there's tons of clinical trials happening, but I'm kind of focusing it on clinical trials, not research. So there's also real world research happening out there. There are survey studies happening out there. So a lot of studies happening. We're also seeing more and more publications come forward. So really exciting. Right now in the planning phase, and studies that are in the planning phase are actively happening. We have 14 clinical trials in Canada focused on psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine. So you'll see psilocybin takes kind of 50% of what's happening, followed by MDMA, and then followed by ketamine. And the two indications of the bigger focus, which is probably not surprising, is depression and PTSD. And these are the only psychedelics right now in terms of clinical trials happening, but I do think that this will change when we get into 2022. We'll start seeing some other psychedelics starting its way with the beginnings of clinical trials. MAPS Canada is helping to support two of the MDMA clinical trials, cognitive processing therapy and MDMA for PTSD, and also looking at therapy as well in couples for PTSD. So I won't talk too much about that. We're going to talk to Dr. Anne Wagner, who's going to give us a lot more information about what's happening with her research. Next slide. So this might look a little complicated, but I'll kind of walk through a little bit about kind of the flow of a clinical trial, getting it to market. So typically we start with preclinical, and this is before it gets to human trials. So in preclinical, we are testing drugs. This is part of kind of the drug discovery. We're testing it on animal models, and we're really saying, does this actually work? And we need to have that data and that evidence to be able to submit it to Health Canada, to be able to get approval to start a clinical trial in humans. And when we do that, it's called a phase 1. That's the first clinical trial that we do. And typically, this is really focused on safety and also getting some information on safe dosing as well. A lot of times these are done with healthy adults. It could take up to a few months, and it's a small amount of people, so 20 to 80. And we have about 2 clinical trials happening in Canada now, both in psilocybin that are in phase 1 right now. And the chance of success of getting through a phase 1 is about 70% success rate. And when I say that percentage is not specific to psychedelic research, it's all drug trials across multiple therapeutical areas. That's just the average success rate getting through phase 1. So once the study is successful, it shows that it's safe and there's some understanding about safe dose, then that study can then move on to phase 2. In a phase 2 study, and as we get through the different phases, there's more people that are involved. Phase 2, we're looking at a patient population. Participants are usually 100 to 300. Right now, I'm actually doing one with 50 patients, so it could be less. It could take up to 2 years. And the purpose of this study is to look at signs of efficacy. So is it actually working? So if it's MDMA with PTSD, is it actually improving PTSD? If it's with treatment-resistant depression, is it helping? And you're always looking at safety. And the success rate is about 30% in this area. And we have 3 studies right now that are in phase 2. Once that's successful, it goes into phase 3. Now, phase 3 is much more different than phase 2. So even if it's successful in a phase 2, phase 3 is a much bigger population, typically multiple sites. Sometimes these are global trials across the globe. And you're looking at around 300 to 1,000 patients. And this patient population is typically more diverse. So it might be more diverse in age. So for example, the phase 2 might only go up to 45 years, or it might go up to 60. And then the phase 3 is more diverse in terms of ethnicity. There might be more distribution of gender. So it is much more diverse. So that's why there's still a chance that a study may not be successful in phase 3. And there's about a 30% success rate for a phase 3 study. Phase 3 now looks at a larger population, 1 to 4 years, and it's looking at safety, efficacy, and really testing the dosing on a large scale. And once that's successful, once the data is done for that, it's submitted for regulatory approval. And then you're able, once it's approved, then it's able to go into market. And even then there's a lot that needs to be done. Reimbursement needs to be looked at. Costing needs to be looked at, and even just manufacturing to scale needs to be looked at. So still a lot of things that have to happen after approval. And phase 4 is very different. Phase 4 happens after a drug is approved. And this is called kind of post-market study. And what happens is if you can kind of count the phase 1 to phase 3, that's not really long-term data. So what happens in phase 4 is that we continue to look at long-term effectiveness and safety of the drug after it's gone to market. And believe it or not, in the past, there have been drugs that have been pulled because of long-term issues that have happened, whether it's side effects and things like that that have come to light more long-term. So that's just kind of the gist of clinical trials. And there's about a 70 to 90% success rate there. And the only study that's in phase 4 now is ketamine because it's already an approved drug. Next slide. And I'm not going to go too much into detail, but this is really the overview of psychedelic clinical trials happening. I already talked about MAPS US looking at MDMA, and they're in phase 3. Compass Pathways is in phase 3 with their psilocybin clinical trial looking at treatment-resistant depression. A couple of other interesting studies to note. There is a study now that's being done by Atma Journey Centers. And it's very interesting because it doesn't really fall within the phase, but it's actually looking at giving psilocybin to mental health professionals. And that's for the purpose of them kind of learning how to provide psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So I think that's really, really, really interesting because it's not typically what we see with other clinical trials. I'm going to leave the PTSD MDMA research because we're going to do some Q&A in that area. We also have a study that's looking at substance abuse disorder as well. And they're looking at safety and efficacy in that space as well. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, can you go back to the slide before? And this just kind of shows you what area we're seeing the research done. Ontario, BC, Montreal, and Saskatchewan. So really interesting to see these clinical trials happening across Canada. Oh, Atma's in Alberta. Thank you. And here are the logos for a lot of companies and organizations that are involved in psychedelic research. So some of these are actively involved now. Some of these are in the planning stage. So we have a mixture of psychedelic companies, academic organizations, hospitals. So it's really great to see how many organizations are involved in psychedelic research. And I apologize if I missed anyone. I did search on the internet and try to find as many press releases and information out there that I could find. So hopefully this will have to be maybe in a few months or a year from now, there'll be a few slides showing all the organizations that are involved in psychedelic research. Next slide. Okay, so that's the end. I just wanted to kind of give you a little kind of overview of what's happening. Now I get to the exciting part, which is where I get to talk to researchers and get to find out what they're working on and what they're doing. So thank you. So I'm just going to introduce my two guests to start off. So Dr. Hayden Rubensohn completed his medical training at the University of Calgary in 2012. He began his residency training in psychiatry at the University of British Columbia, but transferred to internal medicine program in 2014. He completed 4 years of internal medicine training, followed by 2 years of subspecialty in palliative medicine. Dr. Rubenson has been a research therapist for the MAPS since 2014 and has been involved in actually the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. MDMA MAPS clinical trials. So that's the MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And he's been doing those studies out of Vancouver. Dr. Rubenson's hope is to ultimately study psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in palliative populations to address existential distress and psycho-spiritual suffering. So very excited to have you here. I'm sure we have lots of questions about your participation in the phase 2 and 3 MDMA trials. I'm also joined by Dr. Anne Wagner. She is a clinical psychologist and treatment development researcher based in Toronto, Canada. Anne is the founder of Remedy, a mental health innovation community, and Remedy Institute, Remedy's home for research. She is the lead investigator of the pilot trial of cognitive processing therapy for PTSD plus MDMA and the upcoming randomized trial of cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy for PTSD and MDMA, a couples therapy for PTSD. Her team has previously tested in a pilot trial and is deeply committed to bridging the worlds of psychotherapy and non-ordinary states of consciousness, and has a passion for its use for relational healing. She is committed to supporting and protecting traditional and indigenous wisdom with sacred medicine and consciousness expansion, and uplifting the voices of women in the psychedelic world. She is an adjunct professor in the Department of Psychology and an associate member of the Yeats School of Graduate Studies, is the past chair of the traumatic stress section of the Canadian Psychological Association, has served as a global ambassador for the International Society of Traumatic Stress Studies, and sits on the board of Casey House, Toronto's HIV/AIDS hospital. So thank you so much. Very, very impressive and excited to chat. Hello, Dr. Hayden Robinson. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Hi, Dr. Anne Wagner. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks. I think
I'm just testing voices to start. I just want to make sure I can hear you.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Can you hear
So
me?
I know you have the still voice thing you're getting through, Anne. So I'm going to start with Dr. Rubenson, and then we'll flip to you. So really excited. I think everyone's excited. If you could tell us a little bit about how you got interested in psychedelics, and we'd love to hear how you got involved in the phase 2 and 3 MDMA trials.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first off, thank you for having me. Thank you for the invite and for putting on the event. I hope that it's, I have no doubt it will be interesting and exciting. So, yeah, it's hard to go back to like the beginning of how I got interested in this, but all of these things are so, I guess, convoluted because, we grew up in a prohibition era world. So you kind of have to find a way of, discovering these sorts of things. But, I mean, I was in my medical school, and of course we had our traditional lectures on drugs are bad. This is why they ruin people's lives. And then a friend of mine showed up and he was talking about how he had used MDMA. And I was like, oh my gosh, my friend is now a drug addict. And I was just so caught up in that. But I started, like reading about what this thing was he was talking about, and stumbled across the MAPS website. And to be honest, at first I thought that it was a joke website. And then as I dug through the website more and more, I started finding like writings from Stan Groff and other researchers. And I was like, whoa, like these people are physicians and researchers. And this is like, then you start reading about it like, oh my gosh, like these substances are really just like, they just work on different receptors in our brain, just like everything else I'm learning about in medical school. And so I was like, okay, I guess MAPS isn't a joke. Got a little bit more confident, and with a bit of personal experience, suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, like there's a whole other side to what we've been told.
Yeah.
And so that was the point at which I decided, I think I'm going to pursue psychiatry, and ultimately chose to do so in Vancouver because I knew these studies were happening there. And yeah, lo and behold, next thing I was involved. that's how I came to it. Did you ask how I became involved in the studies?
Yeah, yeah.
Or just how I got interested in psychedelics? Okay.
Both of them, actually. So,
Okay.
so it impacted you getting into psychiatry. And how did you come about the phase 2 and phase 3 trials?
Right. I mean, I guess I'd already been sort of somewhat interested in psychiatry and that area of medicine. And then this just kind of really solidified, oh, like this seems big. You know, like my first time that I ever had experience with MDMA, I was like, whoa, this is a big moment. This is a big part of my life. And so I mean, similarly, I had a sense that like, this is going to be a big part of, you know, healthcare in the future.
Yeah.
But you know, it was honestly, there was a lot of serendipity. So I got in touch. You know, the original study therapists in Vancouver were Ingrid Pacey, who's a local psychiatrist and you know, who we owe a lot to in terms of psychedelic research in Canada. And she was working with a psychologist named Andrew Feldmar. And it was kind of difficult to find Ingrid's email online, but Andrew's was much more easy to find. So I emailed Andrew, hey, I'm thinking of going into psychiatry. If I come to Vancouver, like, can I be involved in your study in some capacity? And he emailed me back within a couple of days, no, we don't need you. So I was like, okay, I'm going to keep trying to find Ingrid's email address. And eventually I did. And she was so excited. She was like, this, like, yes, absolutely. Like, we should meet. When you get to Vancouver, be in touch. We'll talk. And so I moved to Vancouver and met up with Ingrid, and she took me to, I think it was kind of like a like-minded people were getting together. There was a bit of a potluck, you know. Mark Hayden was there and kind of was, you know, giving us the updates about some of the work Maps Canada was doing. And then Ingrid recommended that I go and do some holotropic breath work. So I went down to San Francisco and did some holotropic breath work down there. And, you know, that was amazing because Stan Groff was there. And then one night Ingrid said to me, let's go out for dinner. I have a proposition for you. And I thought that she was going to ask me to be a night sitter, which I would have been like thrilled to do, you know, just to sort of sit in the space where MDMA psychotherapy had taken place and to be with people and you know, support them afterwards. And we're sitting at dinner and she told me, well, Andrew's actually decided not to be involved in the research anymore. And do I want to be her research therapist partner?
Wow.
And it was one of those like cartoonish moments where like I actually like dropped my cutlery and my mouth fell open and I had to like pack myself back up. But yeah, I mean, that was sort of the opportunity, the way the opportunity came. And then I did some training with MAPS and then the snowball continued. Phase 2, phase 3, and here we are.
And the training you did, was that more protocol study specific training or psychotherapy training? What was the training?
Oh, well, for phase 2, I mostly did online training with Michael and Annie Mithofer.
Okay.
They were in the midst of training some therapists themselves. And so I mean, obviously I was in my psychiatry residency at the time. So there was sort of a foundational knowledge of, you know, the principles of psychotherapy. And then we did some online video watching together. Phase 3 had a much more sort of rigorous and comprehensive protocolized training model. Yeah.
Oh, great. So tell us a little bit of what you did in the study, your role.
Oh, okay.
I think everyone here is probably going to be happy to be a sitter or anything if you need anyone, just in case.
Yeah. I mean, any role is so exciting and special, really. I mean, you know, the team that we've had involved in Vancouver, like each person is just so special for what they bring. But I was what they call a sub-investigator, but that's more like Health Canada lingo. I mean, I was a study therapist, really is what it was. So, you know, we would call people who had expressed interest in the study. We would talk to them about the study. see if they were still interested in participating after they got sort of a bigger picture. Then we would bring people into our therapy space and kind of do the screening assessments to make sure that they were, appropriate for the study and met the inclusion criteria. And then when all of that sort of background stuff was done, they were enrolled in the study, and then both of the studies were randomized, placebo or MDMA. And it just so happens that every person I ever treated was randomized to MDMA. So for myself, like we would do our prep sessions, we'd bring people in, we'd do our full day therapy sessions, all the integrative work, and then some of the follow-up work over time. But yeah, I mean, as I'm sure a lot of people know, the drug is only administered on days when it's, what we call an experimental session or a full day treatment session. And the other days it's standard therapy. So there's still a lot of, non-altered therapy that goes on. For that, of course, I was glad to have someone like Ingrid by my side with all of her decades of experience. And I worked with Charlotte Jackson for phase 3, and she was also very good to have by my side. And then the full day therapy sessions, I mean, they're kind of like a beast in a way, like it's a full day. I mean, you arrive there, you set up the space, you do all of the check-in stuff before the medication's administered, and then once the medication is administered, then you've got like 6-8 hours of therapy that you're doing. And even if you're not actively engaged in dialogue the whole time, I mean, if someone's having an inward experience, I mean, you're not just sitting there on your cell phone saying, okay, like I'll you're really holding space. So it's a lot of presence that you have to bring. And then more therapy after that. So that's honestly the gist of it.
Yeah. That sounds great. I mean, the results for the phase 2 clinical trials were very impressive. Can you speak to, is that what you expected when you're in the clinical trials and interacting? Did you kind of a moment go, wow, this is huge. This is going to be, great in terms of what you were seeing with the patients?
Yeah. I mean, the trial data was impressive for phase 2. And I think you could probably argue even more impressive for phase 3. But yeah, I mean, I would say that the only surprising part of the data when it came out was like it was stronger and better than anticipated. There was no doubt in my mind that it was going to show benefit, but when it showed how much benefit and how broadly there was benefit, it was very impressive. I mean, I would say that almost every person that I treated would have some moment. And it's not every moment, there's a lot of hard work that still has to be done and a lot that people have to go into and move through to come out the other side. But there were a lot of comments like, I feel like a switch has been flipped, and then I understood X. Yeah. So you were kind of seeing that live, that idea that something was shifting. And it's, if you read Michael Pollan's book, I mean, he's got some interviews with people, and those are the kinds of things, the quotes that he has in the book, like of people really discussing how they felt that shift. And I would say that we were for sure seeing that.
Amazing. I'm going to flip to you. Or is there anything else you want to add about your experience with the studies? Dr. Robinson?
No. Why don't we give Anne a talk?
Okay, I'll flip.
Because she's got a lot of, I mean, her studies have been different.
Yes.
So it'll be really interesting to hear. And I mean, I'm sure there'll be lots of follow-up after.
Yeah. So Dr. Anne Wagner, maybe just tell us also how you got interested in this space.
Sure. Well, mine was very happenstance how I got interested. So I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship in PTSD treatment development research, very classic psychotherapy trial design type postdoc. And my postdoc mentor was a woman named Candace Monson, and she's one of the developers of these two treatments that I'm now leading these studies on. And one day I was in the first year of my postdoc, and Candace, and I had our meeting, and she brought me into her office. She was like, okay, so I had this phone call, and we've been invited to go take MDMA in South Carolina. Do you want to go do that? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but maybe. And so that was my introduction to MDMA research. And what that was we were being invited to participate in what was a clinical trial for therapists that had been run by MAPS in the States for people who are going to be involved in the research. So that gave me a firsthand experience with MDMA therapy. And I think I've said this in multiple forms. Like, that was my first experience with a psychedelic. I knew basically nothing about it ahead of time. I knew a lot about psychotherapy and about trial design and PTSD, but that, ooh, forgive me, my voice is still in and out. But going to have that experience was really eye-opening. And, I remember going in with like, right, I'm going to think about this in terms of how it can be applied to our research and whatnot. And then as soon as I was there, and Annie and Michael Mithofer, who Hayden was mentioning, were, my study therapists in this trial, and they are now my collaborators. But I realized like what an experience that I was about to have. And so I got to actually, sink into that, let go of what will happen next with the research, and just have my own therapeutic experience. And for me, it was the most important therapeutic experience of my life. And so that really opened my mind up to integrating into the research. And so from that point forward, I, kind of threw myself into our first pilot study, which was, sorry, the combination of the couples therapy plus MDMA, which we ran out of the US starting in about 2016. We started working on it in 2014, but it took till 2016 to start. And then from there, we finished that trial, and, that had excellent results. And so that immediately kind of led into the next pilot study that I've been, working on in the background for a number of years now, and that we're finally running here in Toronto, which is the combination of cognitive processing therapy, which is an individual treatment for PTSD with MDMA, a little bit different than the type of therapy that, Hayden has been doing in phase 2 and 3, because it's using a standalone treatment for PTSD that's already, widely used, widely disseminated. And we're doing that on purpose. And this study has been, it's a co-funded study between MAPS US and MAPS Canada, as a strategic decision to try to see, can you combine this with a treatment that people are already using in many healthcare systems for the treatment of PTSD? And so we're, creating this line of pilot data to show you can combine it with these different treatments that exist. So we're, after a long journey and a lot of COVID delays, we're finally running that one here in Toronto, which is a real joy to be able to be at that point. And we're also, we're getting ready to submit to Health Canada for the larger couple study, which is a really, really exciting development that I've been planning on doing since we ran that pilot. So it's been a long time in the making, which we're really excited about.
So maybe tell me about this couple study, just for the people that are listening. So somebody has PTSD, and their significant other comes and goes through the session, and it's only given to the person with PTSD, and the other person is with them? How does it work?
No, actually. So both people, so the way we do any dyadic work, and so it just so happened that our pilot study was all romantic couples. That tends to be who wants to go to therapy together. But for that study, and actually for the larger study, it could be any two people who are close. So it could be a family member, a friend, your, spouse. Okay. It could be anybody.
Okay.
It kind of skews toward romantic partners because that's who might want to go. But the idea is one person has PTSD, and then their loved one does not have PTSD. And then but they both participate fully in the therapy process. And so they are both in the psychotherapy, they're both in the MDMA sessions together. And so they're going through that experience together, which is, we found, when we do that treatment on its own without MDMA, that's incredibly helpful because the partner's along for the journey and also really is addressing their own experiences of what it's like being in relationship with someone who has PTSD. It has an immense impact on the family system, on the community, on that person's mental health on their own. So it's really addressing the needs of two people and the relationship at the same time. And so that's the idea that we hold throughout the whole treatment.
And what got you to the place where this is the area that you wanted to focus? There's, everyone's like, there's a lot of folks on PTSD specifically and treatment-resistant depression with psilocybin. What made you decide to go down this road with the couples?
Oh, well, I love working with relationships. They're so fundamental in our world. Like they are, whether they're working or not working, present or absent, like we are always in some type of relation with other people. So I think it's just incredibly helpful to not necessarily always think of healing and growth as an individual process. Like if you have people coming, doing it together or coming alongside you in it, it's more likely to stick over time, and broader change can happen as well because more than one person is involved in that. And it's incredibly healing to be witnessed in that process as well. And not just by your therapists, but by someone who's in your day-to-day life. And for both people, it's really remarkable when, they get to see each other shift and change and grow and evolve. And it's amazing what can happen for the strength of the relationship. So that to me is like my happy place of being able to see the connections between folks. And it's not just MDMA that would be potentially effective for that, but MDMA in particular is very useful in terms of being able to create that empathogenic experience and ability to communicate together.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel like we're going to change the space in the future for couples. This is going to be like the thing that people do.
Yeah.
There's been kind of, especially of lately, a lot of mention in the media about kind of, ethics around clinical trials, especially kind of a safe space for women and even the general public. Do you want to speak to that a little bit about what can be done to make sure that, because how can women be comfortable participating in clinical trials, or anyone?
Yeah, that's a really important thing. And I think one thing that we really, really hold in our work at Remedy Institute is this idea that we're doing this as, licensed mental health care providers who are so, we put our ethics first and foremost. Like, I think that is like, we're regulated healthcare providers. We're very much doing this as a team. And so, as Hayden was mentioning with, how important it is with your co-therapist, not only your co-therapist, for us, it's like, we have a whole team that's involved. Like we have multiple therapists, we have research assistants, we have, the night attendants, we have the physicians. Like, it's a team endeavor. And then when you have that many eyes who are focused on the ethics and the integrity of the work and really doing that carefully, and also trying to make sure we have, diverse representation in our team as well, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of just a variety of factors, to try to make sure it actually feels like the people you're going to be interacting with represent you in some way, and I think that's really important and actually factors into even how we do our recruitment and how we do, we're doing this, excuse me, way of randomizing folks into the study because we've had so much interest, for example, in the CPT study. It's been humbling, the amount of interest that we've had, and to the extent where it's a lottery. It's actually a lottery in terms of who contacts us and then whose number gets randomly generated that we call for phone screens. But what we've done in particular, because of the kind of lack of diversity that's been in other settings, is one of the things we ask in screening is around people's ethnicity, because we want to make sure that folks who are underrepresented in research might have more of an opportunity to participate. And so we make sure that we actually, offer more opportunity and like kind of double enter people into the lottery that identify as people who are, people of color. So that way we're trying to ensure that we're not going to keep replicating some of the problems and only one group of people being involved. So kind of veered a little bit from your original question.
Oh, that's okay. No, that was another question anyway. So seeing that we're on the topic, Dr. Rubensohn, do you want to add anything in terms of what you guys have been doing with, let's say, the phase 3 now in terms of trying to ensure diversity in your clinical trial populations?
I mean, it's been a challenge. I mean, I think the different relationships that different cultural groups have with research influences the extent to which people come forward and indicate an interest in participation. So there are groups and different cultural groups that don't necessarily have the same trust or comfort, and so just by virtue of that and demographics, we certainly have that same scenario where the vast majority of people who are putting their name into that lottery system are Caucasian people, and it's just such a fine balance between making it fair, equal access. So I mean, somebody shouldn't have a lesser chance of participating because they're part of a dominant cultural group, while at the same time, like Anne says, like how do you make it so that underrepresented groups do have an opportunity? So I mean, we certainly did try our best to help those who were of other cultures be able to get through the screening. And to clarify, I don't mean like saying things that were untrue, not like, oh, we'll ignore that exclusion criteria. What I mean is, if there was somebody who was like, well, I'm out of town and I need some help with this, and can you rearrange your schedule? Like there is just an attempt to be extra accommodating so that people could overcome the challenges that might have kept them at bay. I will say that as we moved into phase 3, because I think in phase 2 it was the same thing. It was very large representation of Caucasian people. But as we moved on, I mean, we had people that were of, Central American ancestry, South Asian, and certainly like we did try quite hard to build relationships with some Indigenous elders that, members of our team knew. That unfortunately didn't actually translate into Indigenous people being involved. But part of the other challenge is, I think if you look at these studies, like you say, like you said in your presentation, phase 3 does have a large number of people, but Vancouver, like we treated 6 or 7 people.
Right.
So trying to, include that diversity when your site is still quite small can still be a challenge. But I think there needs to be significant effort put into making sure that different groups are represented, because we already have the data to show that these treatments work in a largely white population, and obviously it's going to be more beneficial to society at large if we can say, hey, this actually works for different ethnic and cultural groups as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And hopefully in the phase 3, there's going to be more with all the different sites. Hopefully there's going to be more kind of capture of diversity. And it's been interesting because, and I don't know if it happened because of all the COVID trials and everything, but FDA did come up with a really great guidance on diversity in clinical trials. And they have some really great kind of guidance there in terms of having a plan in phase 3 and really some good strategies of how to help improve kind of diverse representation in clinical trial participants, which is really great to see. So for those kind of looking to conduct clinical trials in this space, what advice would you have based on because I think people think that clinical trials is easy, right? You have a lineup of people and it's no problem, but like, what are kind of some of the lessons learned that you guys encountered and challenges?
I'll let Anne speak to sort
Yeah.
of like,
Okay.
that how many years it takes to really make this happen. And I think I did notice, for example, in the chat group that there was a question like, are we getting the politicians involved? And here are we making any progress with politicians? Do they recognize the benefits of psychedelics? And I mean, Anne, maybe you've had different experience, but the lack of moving things forward is not a lack of, it's not a political obstruction. In fact, I received numerous emails from Health Canada saying like, we're doing a clinical trials 101 session for all people who are interested in psychedelic research. Like Health Canada wants these studies to be happening. But to get a study going, I mean, Anne will tell you about that. What I'll add, and then I'll stop. I'll give you a chance, Anne. Like when you say there's a lineup of people, I mean, it's true. The number of people that will email the Vancouver site and say, hey, I want to be involved in the trial, like it's a very large number. But for our phase 3 trial to find 7 eligible participants, we had to screen about 70 people. And for all different reasons, people aren't eligible. So, you can imagine in a phase 3 trial, especially one as sort of regimented as this, because it's such an early phase of the research, if you're trying to recruit 300 people, you probably have to screen, 3,000 to 4,000. So yeah, it can be tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about that, just that angle of screening to participating, like that's one giant piece of the pie. But the just the rigor that goes into actually doing a good clinical trial, it takes effort, and it takes time, and it takes precision, and it takes a strong team to do it. And that's why we don't have a bajillion clinical trials, is it takes a lot of effort, and they can't really be rushed when you're doing it in this phased way, right? Like in terms of needing to get the right things in place, the length of time it takes to get all of the appropriate documentation together, and through your various regulators and your ethics boards and training of your people. And so it's it's always boggles my mind when we think about trying to do companies are like, we're going to do this faster and better and stronger, and it's like, well, it's not actually about doing it faster, it's about doing it well. And I think that's incredibly important right now, because it's very possible to run a good clinical trial in an appropriate length, like appropriate meaning like a couple of years, going from inception of idea to the end. But the challenge is it takes many people with a lot of expertise in different moving parts. And so it's it's been like, for example, I've not encountered anything obstructionist to the process. It's just slow, and it's difficult, and it's effortful. And so that's kind of the name of how all clinical trials.
Yeah. I mean, and even with psychedelic trials, it's not like some trials where you could just give a drug and that's it, right? And then you maybe take some vital signs and you measure safety, take some lab values. With this one, you've got your MDMA drug, but you've got the psychotherapy piece of it. And like you said, I mean, that's hours, of being with patients, and that's one-on-one, right? Or is is it one patient and 2 people during those sessions?
It was for us,
Yeah, and for us as well.
And that, you're alluding to a really interesting and important piece when it comes to psychedelic therapy research, because at one point, a lot of us from the MAPS team, we tried, other organizations tried to recruit us for studies they were trying to do, because at the time, I mean, we were the most well-trained, not to say we were the best. I mean, there's a lot of underground therapists and there's a lot of other incredible therapists, but in terms of, people who had gone through some kind of recognizable training protocol, like there was a very limited number of us. And so all of a sudden, you could make a bunch of trials, but if you don't actually have therapists to provide the therapy, I mean, your trial's not going anywhere. So, and there's the whole added layer of these trials where it's, we're not talking about a medication that's already approved and we're just studying it in a different indication. We're talking about an unapproved and controlled substance. So, there's additional hoops to jump through. And I mean, I often think that, I think there's people who wish that psychedelics would be treated differently to sort of expedite the studies but I mean, I think if we look at it from the perspective of Health Canada, like their mandate is to make sure that drugs that come to market for Canadians are safe and effective compounds, so that we don't discover, oh, whoa, we sped through that study and we totally missed the fact that 20% of people get this side effect. And so I think we wouldn't feel comfortable if our diabetes drugs or our cancer drugs or whatever were not treated with rigor. And I think that it's the same with these compounds. Like, we need to make sure that at some point when they're available, we can be confident in it. So that rigor and slowness has a role to play.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's a lot of argument that, about why aren't these just drugs approved? Why is Health Canada causing problems? But really, this is like every single drug has had to go through this. This is not unique to psychedelics. And at the end of the day, when you're putting a new drug, according to regulators, there's no therapeutic value unless you can do those clinical trials to show it. And how do we know what the side effects are if we're not documenting it? How do we know what dose is right? And I was just thinking about, when you're talking about the psychotherapy, one of the other potential challenges is the training of psychotherapists as well. And it's not like you can have 10 rooms going with 10 different psychotherapists, because you probably want some consistency too, right? You probably have main people that are doing your psychotherapy as well, and just space. I mean, you're probably using up your space just for one or two people.
Yeah.
Controlled drug substances, having the appropriate storage. There's so many things. I talk to clients all the time, and they think it's just easy, or they argue that, no, we can go into phase 3 straight away because we know our drug works. Okay, it doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? It just doesn't work like that.
But it's a huge risk. I mean, one of the, I guess, nice things about phase 2 is you get to do a mini trial to see if the untold fortune that you're going to pour into your phase 3 is actually going to pay off.
Yeah. And if you think of how much that's going to cost,
exactly.
You're looking at 30 million plus. So do you really want to go straight into 30 million plus, or do you want to maybe do a mini phase 2 first to see that the feasibility of it?
And when you talk about space, it was one of the issues we had in Vancouver, because I mean, there are solutions, but we had 2 rooms in our treatment space, but 1 bathroom. Mm-hmm. And so just the way it works, I mean, somebody might be having a therapy session, and if they come into the hallway and they're, receiving MDMA, you really kind of want to be careful that the person in the other room isn't going to come out, and there's going to be some kind of new dynamic that you create when they're in the midst of their experience. And so, I mean, there's sort of those organizational issues that, yes, I mean, space and how do you accommodate everyone's needs?
Yeah.
And it's you and Candace still working together?
So Candace is an investigator on some of the studies. So I'm leading them, and we're doing it out of Remedy Institute. So it's actually the first, I believe we're the first investigator-initiated MDMA trials in Canada with those ones.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's outside of an academic institution. I mean, Remedy Institute is a charitable organization, but we're not in a university.
Right.
We're doing it there. Mm-hmm.
And how many? So you can do one, do one session at a time, right? Because you would be there
right now, but we have the space where we could do more than that if once once we're comfortable with one at a time in the space,
Right.
and making sure that, as you say, the dance between the
Yeah,
rhythms.
exactly.
And, exactly. Yeah. And
Um,
just maybe a note on that too, like, when it dawned on me, I'm like, oh, I think we're actually the first investigator initiated trials, because all the other MDMA ones have been sponsored by MAPS in the States, right? So, and the Canadian sites have been extensions of things that have already been FDA approved. So that was a real factor when we were submitting for the current study that we're doing, of going like, are they going to be okay with it being like they're the only regulators on this one? Like there's no FDA, there's no DEA. And I have to say, like, it was actually a very smooth process and very like clear and like scientific review. And it was just, that was very heartening for me to go through that process with Health Canada on that first study and go like, right, no, it's if you bring the right science behind it, it will make sense and it will work. So that was good.
it's great to also see that. I know that a lot of people are looking at academic centers to do research, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that. But it's nice to see with you guys that, because I do a lot of research in community with clinics and specialty clinics. I like that because you're working with clinics that in the future are going to be these community clinics that are going to be doing this therapy in the future when these drugs are approved. So just want to put it out there that that's a viable option, is to really look at community centers too, especially if you're looking at diversity and things like that. Starting to get out there in communities where it can reach a diverse population is great. And you're also working with people that are going to be doing this down the road. So I think that's great to see as well. Any other challenges before I get to the next question?
No, challenge it, but that's exactly right. That's why we do this at Remedy Institute, is because we want to have it in a home that's already doing clinical work, already doing community-based work. So that was the whole point.
Excellent. So this is obviously, psychedelics is going to really change medicine. What changes we expect when MDMA is approved? And what can we do to prepare for this? I mean, you're already talking about lack of psychotherapists, right? So I'm just wondering, if we will look into the future, and how do you see this changing medicine?
Well, one thing that I'm just going to really put the plug in for, because every time I can see it coming up in the chat and the questions is like, how do I do this? How do I get trained? And I just really want to emphasize that first things first with this is like becoming a good psychotherapist, right? And becoming a good, physician, if that's the route you want to go, therapist, if that's the route you want to go. And it's not necessarily psychedelic first, right? It's like, that's a thing you can learn how to work with. So think of it like that's a modality you're going to be working with, but the nothing goes beyond the base, like the good skills of like being able to sit with someone, hold space, work with what comes up, manage your own emotions, your own experiences. Like that's incredibly important. And I hear like all kinds of folks wanting to be guides and or sitters or whatnot. But in the framework, if it's becoming a legalized medicine, it's going to be regulated. And therefore it's going to be regulated healthcare providers who at least initially are going to be working with it. So really, please, if you're thinking about wanting to do this in that context, hone your clinical skills first, and then you learn how to work with the psychedelics. And so that's my initial bit on that one.
Yeah, I think I have seen that advice come up a lot. It's like, figure out what you're passionate about, pursue that, and find a way of adding psychedelics into it, as opposed to, like you said, psychedelic first.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because there is a long road still. I think before this is, super widely available. I mean, obviously things happen exponentially. We're going to see a lot of change in the next 5 years, but you're not going to do a master's degree this year and be working in psychedelics next year. But yeah, I think that there's no doubt that there will be hospitals and academic facilities and are going to wind up with departments of psychedelic medicine, because I think this is going to be pretty transformational in terms of psychiatric care, substance use disorders, for my own field, palliative care is there's gonna be a huge place for this. And I think that, you know, my kind of the arc that I've seen is let's get this approved for one thing. And I imagine the first thing we'll see is that, you know, MDMA will be approved in certain circumstances for people who have PTSD, and whether that's, you know, sort of the kind of therapy we've done in Vancouver, or if it's, you know, one of the therapeutic modalities that Anne is studying. And then I think we're going to probably see a proliferation of studies for a bunch of other indications. And I think before we know it, we'll have a much better understanding of who would benefit from what and in what order and what kind of therapy and what kind of issues. And there's still so much we have to learn. I think the other thing that, you know, we need to prepare for as a society and honestly as a community of people who support psychedelics is, how are we going to support the people for whom this doesn't work? Because as impressive as all of the research study outcomes have been, I mean, we fairly consistently see that for a third-ish of people, they don't respond. Like, this isn't the right therapy for them. And I think there's so much hype, there's so much positive press, which it deserves. But I think people don't imagine, well, what if I'm in the 33%? And as you start to increase the numbers, I mean, 33% of 10 means 3 people aren't going to respond. And okay, like you can, but what happens when you've got 10,000 people and, you know, 33% haven't responded, or a third of them haven't responded? What are you going to do with those now thousands of people who are, you know, feeling like this didn't work for me? And I think we need to make sure that we have systems in place, not to just take people through these treatment protocols, but support them afterwards as well.
Yeah, I really want to echo that, because I think also because of all the popular press and really the push that's brought psychedelics to here, because it needed this kind of critical mass at a certain point in the enthusiasm. But now, like, I noticed the tide shift from, in some way, especially for folks who are looking for treatment, it shifted from enthusiasm to this is the only thing. And that's I just want to share that, like, that's not true. Like, this is a type of treatment that is effective for some folks. And it's really fascinating when we have people contacting our clinic who are just desperate looking for this service. The vast majority of the time, for example, they haven't actually had an evidence-based PTSD treatment before. So we're always trying to gear them towards that, because also, you know, there's only a few spots in the trial. So it's a very small number of people who are going to access this right now. And instead, you know, going after really good quality treatment and other ways, you know, is, you know, an option right now. So exactly. This is not a panacea. This is not going to be like the magic wand solution for everything. I think it's going to be a very excellent treatment option, and it's an option, and it's not going to be appropriate for everyone. Not everyone's going to want to do it. And we should keep doing the research to see for whom and when and why, and all those pieces.
Totally. And that's where I see, I mean, after approval, we're not going to want to stop, right? As I said, there's still so much to learn. I mean, I think one of the huge questions is, how do you scale this up so that, you know, you're not dedicating two therapists to one client. Not that I'm opposed to that model, but I mean, it does make it very labor intensive. And so you run into an issue where, what I'm saying is, I think one of the key questions is how do we apply this to group therapy? Can we safely apply it? Because what if suddenly 2 or 3 therapists could be treating 10 people, and you can actually really start to, you know, make this more accessible?
Absolutely. I think group therapy is going to be huge with that. And also, like, one thing that we're doing for our trials, it's like, it's not that extent, but like at least a step down from the 2 therapist model through the whole thing, is we have a primary therapist who goes through all of it. And then a secondary therapist is only there for the MDMA and sessions. And so at least that's, like, you know, half the therapist time for the second person.
Totally. Because I think one of the things we're going to see is, the MDMA will be approved, but it's going to take a while before I think provincial health authorities actually add MDMA as a insured benefit. So what I mean by that is initially, if you're going to want to do this therapy, like you're going to have to pay for it. It's not going to be paid for by your healthcare. And so if you think about it, like 2 therapists for like many, many hours of time, I mean, that's expensive. And so you get back to an equity and accessibility issue initially, but that's why I think it's going to be so important to really explore how we can make it more cost effective. And I see like this post about MDMA being cost effective, and there was a really good +1 article that came out a year or 2 ago that kind of showed that it will be cost effective. I have no doubt about that, but like, I've seen the same thing in terms of like diabetes meds come out over the course of my medical training, and it takes a while before provincial ministries of health accept that data and start to cover things. So that's going to be another interesting piece to look at.
That's great. You raise a good point, because the affordability of this, right? That the health equity of this is going to be huge. And, the more we look at ways to decrease costs, like with the group therapy and things like that, will be really great to kind of look at how this can be more accessible.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be big. And I think even with clinical trials, starting to look at the data around the economics of everything as well, in terms of patient A would be on antidepressants for this long, compared to how many sessions does it take? And there's just so much to learn, right? Is there a set amount of therapy depending on, how they present with? If they had depression for a longer time, is that coincide with more therapy? There's just so much that we still need to learn about this whole area.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and like let's say person A is on antidepressants for X amount of time, and what it does is it keeps them out of hospital, but they never get back to work. Yes. As opposed to person B, who maybe their MDMA treatment costs more money, but not only does it keep them out of hospital, but they get back to work. They start a business, they treat others. So there's a lot we have to learn about that.
Yeah, I really, in some ways, I've used this term before, like describing it like we're almost like the infancy of psychedelic research, like right at the beginning. And there's just so many questions. I mean, there's going to be generations of research ahead of us in terms of being and like getting precise and answering these different questions, exploring these different things. And I think that's also, perhaps also for this audience is something to know, like there's still very few trials existing right now, and they're for very specific indications. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these things that people are asking, like, well, what about this? And what about this? Like, yes. And we're just not there yet. Like, yes. These are all great things. We don't have the answers yet, but we just got to keep going to figure out what they are, because we're still working on, Sabrina, you showed that overview of what's going on. I'm like, that's in the whole country. That's it. Like that's all, ever. Right. So we're right at the beginning. So it's very exciting to be there. Like, imagine, like, what other field are you at the beginning? And we're not actually at the beginning. Of course, we're at the beginning, excuse me, of this particular type of research in terms of in this medical healthcare model. Right. But, because we have so much we can then start to apply and learn from what's come before, which is fantastic.
Amazing. Seeing that we only have 5 minutes left, just if you have any closing remarks or any kind of, if you had a crystal ball to look in the future, any thoughts you want to share with anyone?
There's so many thoughts. I think it's kind of interesting to reflect on what we've discussed today, that interesting blend between the optimism, the reality check, alluding to some of the parts that come out of the woodwork. And I think it's just really important to keep all of that in mind together. I mean, we're on the cusp of something so powerful that I suspect is going to be so transformative. At the same time, we have to, ground things in reality and have that patience. And we have to also be a community that stays true to our ethics and our principles and and hold one another accountable, because as this becomes more widely available, like, we need to keep it so that the energy can remain enthusiastic and excited, so that we're not running into issues of, misusing that space.
Yeah.
So I think we need to, just as a community, maintain that excitement and enthusiasm, keep ourselves in check, and I think we'll see great things.
Right.
Yeah, I'm inspired, Hayden, by that. And I think the keeping ourselves in check is an interesting one, because I mean, I get so excited about the possibility in the research. Of course, like, I offered some tempering in my comments, but I changed the trajectory of my work, my research, a lot of my life all my life to do this work, which is amazing. And like, I think we also have a responsibility as, like, stewards of this work to do it in a ethical, community-minded way, right? Because I think, the lessons that psychedelics have taught me are that, it's not an individual experience, right? And that we really need to be thoughtful of the others around us within it. And I think, be that through relational healing, be that through the models with which we do this, be that through the equity lens with which we need to see it rolled out. I think we need to be mindful of that.
Well, thank you so much. This was so great to talk to two experts that have been doing clinical trials in this space. It was really informative, and thank you so much. I'm not sure if someone else is going to come on now. I'll see. Scott, do you want to say something? Okay, great. Oh, you have to unmute.
No.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
You're good. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much, and Hayden, for situating the research in such a very personal and impactful way for us. Like, it's just really amazing, and I appreciated sort of the tempered optimism and realism, and just really appreciate your dedication and your work in this area. And so thank you so much for participating in the panel, and thanks to Sabrina for your overview of research in Canada and for hosting this panel. It was just really wonderful. And I just want to give one last pitch here. So MAPS Canada is a registered Canadian charity. We can't support this life-changing psychedelic research taking place without the generous support of donors like you. During this giving season, we ask that you give generously towards MAPS Canada and support psychedelic research in Canada in this fastly moving and really amazing psychedelic renaissance. All donations received before the end of the year, December 31st, will get a 2021 charitable tax receipt. And we ask you just stay tuned. MAPS Canada is going to host some webinars coming in the new year. One will be about the impact of research having on drug policy, and we'll further look into clinical trials a bit later in the year. And also we'll have some other exciting announcements about new projects and partnerships and things happening. So thank you very much for participating, and I really look forward to seeing you all soon, and have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you.